Welcome to Let's Talk Climate. I'm Gibbs Raylan, Director of the American Climate Leadership Awards Program at ecoAmerica. I'm in Vermont on lands shepherded by the Abenaki people. I'm looking forward to today's topic, You Can Do This, Replicable Models for Local Climate Action. The last episode in our American Climate Leadership Awards series with our newest guest, Nancy Metzger-Carter, Schools for Climate Action. And we are so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Gibbs. It's really such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for hosting the space and giving Schools for Climate Action an opportunity to share with a wider audience. I'm coming to you today from the land of the Great Rancheria, Southern Pomo, Cashayo Pomo, what's known as Sonoma County, California. These folks are really one of the oldest surviving continuous cultures in the world. And so as an educator, I'm always looking at ways in my climate education to advance Indigenous climate solutions as a part of my work. So yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Well, I'm especially excited today because we're about to kick off the 4th annual American Climate Leadership Awards program. This awards program has become the nation's leading climate awards program, recognizing climate leadership while awarding $175,000 in prizes. We invite you to go to ecoamerica.org today to learn more about the program requirements and to submit your application or to nominate a standout individual or organization. So Nancy, I have 3 questions for you today. And the first question is on climate education. Right now, we see a lack of education materials, educators that are versed across the board in the US, and lack of materials for teachers and districts. We also see missing best practices for engaging with youth in the climate activist space as an adult. So I wondered if you could tell us about some small systemic changes that can be made to ensure students receive a robust climate education.
What a great question, Gibbs. And, of course, I want to jump to big systemic solutions because when we're really looking at climate education, so many students in America are not getting any sort of climate education. And it ultimately comes down to where you live and what state you live in and those state standards, and then sometimes even down to the local school board. Looking at starting just education materials. I've been teaching about climate change for about 20 years now. And there is a huge lack of climate incorporation into textbooks, right? I'm still a teacher. I teach every day, and most districts will adopt sort of the national big 3 groups of textbooks. And these textbooks have to be written for the masses, right? And so each state is going to have a different set of standards when it comes to climate education. And those textbook companies really have to sort of appeal to all of them. Some states have adopted the next generation science standards. So you might see some climate change in those textbooks. But for the most part, it is completely absent from any sort of civic part of a textbook, social studies part of a textbook, history part of a textbook. And we know that climate change is not just a science issue, it's an economic issue. It's a historical issue. So there's so many opportunities right now I see for textbook publishers, independent publishers, to really step up and fill this space. Teachers need it. There's some great organizations that are kind of doing this already and giving this away for free, like the Teach Justice Project with the Zen Education Project, as well as Our Climate, Action for the Climate Emergency. So right now it has to be kind of teachers plugging into these groups in order to access them. So the materials piece is really, really important for teachers, especially because many of them feel like they aren't equipped or they don't know enough about climate about it. So materials are something that I'm really I'm really interested in moving forward. And then something small, I think that once you get climate, right, into your curriculum, whether it's, working it into a social studies or science class, often teachers want to jump and have an action project for students. And one of the ones that we've seen the most that I started doing in 2004 was the carbon footprint project, where students will calculate their own personal carbon footprint, and then they will come back and report out maybe after a week of trying to turn off the lights when they leave the room, or what it would look like if their parents bought an electric car. I used this lesson that I didn't know actually came from British Petroleum. I actually got materials from British Petroleum. They were really shiny. And as a new teacher, I was like, oh, okay, it's a lesson. I can take it and plug it right in, right? There,
It's available.
yeah, teachers just don't have time. And I used it for years. And then one day a student called me out, and the student really said, I don't have a choice in the car that my parents are driving right now, and I'm on free and reduced lunch. And so I don't get to choose what I'm eating for lunch or even for breakfast. And I kind of stopped and realized that it wasn't a great way of, presenting the climate crisis, the reality of it, and then having an opportunity for students to take action. It almost felt like we were putting the burden onto them. And I think they would respond to me in that way. So I stopped using the carbon footprint. I just completely stopped. And then I went looking for something that was addressing the climate crisis through student advocacy, more from a way where they are holding the system accountable and not their own individual consumption patterns that they don't have much control over.
It's a great story and a great illustration of some of the tools that might be available, and looking underneath the cover to see, okay, where is this coming from? And thanks for sharing that anecdote. So the second question that I have is about getting youth voice into policy. Can you explain how Schools for Climate Action has been getting youth voice into policy, and what specific actions have you taken?
Well, Schools for Climate Action was sort of born out of this idea to not have this sort of individual action piece, and was actually born from a local teacher right before the Tubbs fire destroyed our community in 2017. Shortly after the fire, we really realized that education leaders have a responsibility to step up and call for bold systemic climate action and to engage students in the process with it. So Park Guthrie, the original founder of Schools for Climate Action, came up with this idea to use school district and student council climate action resolutions that use the language of lawmakers in order to call for action on climate within their district, but also calling on Congress to act on climate as well. So though we sort of started at this local level, the first level of elected officials, the school district leaders. Once students would pass a school district climate resolution, then that gave them an opportunity to meet directly with their elected official. So they would take that school district resolution and they would set up a meeting, and we would help them do this and give them advocacy training on here's how you meet with an elected official, here's sort of the structure that you follow. And then from there, that led to a lot of students meeting directly with their federal representatives and then also their state representatives as well. For us specifically, on the state level, that led to two students working with Senator Mike McGuire to draft a climate emergency declaration for the state of California. And the students kind of cast a wide net, looked at all of the climate emergency declarations that had passed in California, wrote one themselves based on the themes they saw, passed it through multiple groups and tribes in the state, brought it to Senator McGuire, and then relentlessly followed up with him.
Yeah.
And so he agreed and introduced the resolution. It passed the state Senate with bipartisan support, passed through the California Assembly Committee, and just passed the California Assembly. And now it is officially the second state in the US that has passed a climate emergency declaration. And so why that seems really big, it ultimately is really easy for other students to replicate, and really easy for students to kind of like see an open space. And if you ask these students why they were so successful, they'll basically say they were just relentless. They respectfully continued to follow up and follow up and follow up. And then they created a partnership with their local state official. And then on the federal level, we worked in 2019 with Representative Barbara Lee. Probably 12 different school districts in her district had passed bold climate resolutions. This is, Oakland and Berkeley, these schools that have been thinking about these issues for a long time. And so when we brought those to DC and sat down and met with her and her staff, she was like, this is great that students are leading this. And I think that every student should have the opportunity to have a climate education, just like, these students are getting in the US. And so she said, why don't you write a resolution and I'll introduce it on the federal level. And that's how House Resolution 29 came about, which now has 53 congressional co-sponsors. And it's basically just a declaration supporting the teaching of climate change in schools. And then our most recent one that we're actually traveling to DC next week to advocate for is House Resolution 975, which is focused on youth mental health and climate amid recurrent climate disasters. And, that really came from personal experience here with the Tubbs fire, and noticing afterwards that there was no space for the 3,000 students who lost their home to have any mental health support. And, we saw that was a huge gap and wanted to be able to address it through funding, through place-based mutual aid organizations, expanding coverage with Medicaid. So really looking at how Congress can first acknowledge the fact that the climate crisis is affecting the mental health of youth, which this is the first piece of legislation that does that. And what's great about that is that, Congress didn't come up with that on their own. They needed youth voices to come in and say, hey, look, this is affecting our mental health. We already are struggling with our mental health. Please acknowledge this and incorporate this into your policy moving forward.
Well, that's just another great indicator of the perseverance with the youth today, and that's really a perfect segue to our third question, which is on climate anxiety and youth climate action. So, as you mentioned, we see this current epidemic of anxiety, both generalized and trauma-based. And so, how can we, as adults here, support students through climate education to take meaningful climate action? And, you've given us some great examples of how youth are making change. What can we do as parents and within communities to support them?
Well, I think the first thing is that they need to see adults taking action too. I think a lot of times adults can be so inspired by the youth movement that they might forget that they need to take action themselves. So number one, modeling, right? As a teacher, we're always modeling what we want to see from students, but it's really important for them, for their mental health, to see that they are not out there alone. Something that's really new for me that I have been learning since I've been working on House Resolution 975 is holding a little space for grief for students. I tended to sort of jump from my climate education right into action and advocacy. And what I'm learning is that there's actually some space that needs to be in between, where students have the opportunity to express and name their grief that, their future is going to be filled with accelerating climate disasters, and that isn't the future that they potentially had imagined. And so that is very alive for them. And that's, a big part of the generalized piece for climate education. And that's really like the, Brit Way, the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America, the Good Grief Network is doing amazing work around this and partnering with educators to help support them, and really seeing that bringing in SEL piece into climate education is really important.
So important. Yeah.
And then finally, agency. Really having the opportunity for students to take action on climate that feels systemic, meaningful to them, they will tell you, really helps with their anxiety. And something really important that I want to note is that a lot of times these youth activists will spend all of their time after school, their time on the weekends, and that burns out their mental health as well. And so I am advocating constantly to make sure that their advocacy and their activism work is happening during the school day. And that also promotes equity as well, because you're only going to get a certain group of students that can attend after school or on weekends.
Right.
If it's built into the school day, it creates an incredible amount of equity for students, lowers the barrier to entry, and then students can go out and still be on the softball team and be a part of the theater production, and they don't have to, dedicate their whole entire time outside of school to it. So I really advocate for ideally incorporating it into an academic class, but at least incorporating it into the actual school day, whether it's a lunch club or some other elective space that schools can find.
Right, because I mean, these youth activists, they can't function very well if their own well-being is put in a bad spot, right? So that's really important. Well, what you're doing is remarkable, and one of the reasons that Schools for Climate Action took home the top prize and $50,000. So we're big fans. Congratulations on that work that you're doing, and congratulations to the young people you're working with, and the movement that you're continuing to push forward across the country. I want to say to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed any of the earlier ACLA series episodes, you can watch them on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel. And please remember to submit your applications or nominate someone. Once again, this year, we are offering $175,000 in prizes. And we're incredibly excited to read your climate stories. You can also engage with us online with the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest thought leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. From all of us at ecoAmerica and Path of Positive, we want to say thank you for joining. Bye for now, and we'll see you soon. Bye.